Captain Emily Carter stood just inside the hangar's open bay, watching the relentless rain lash the wet tarmac beyond. The storm was gathering strength, a Category 5 typhoon bearing down on the Pacific Fleet with the kind of fury that could swallow ships whole. Dark clouds churned overhead, the sky a swirling canvas of gray and black. The wind howled, twisting gusts that ripped at her flight jacket and sent sheets of water spraying through the air. The distant crack of thunder echoed like a warning. Inside the command center, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Radios sputtered with static and fragmented transmissions. Officers clustered around digital maps and glowing monitors, voices clipped and urgent as they debated the impossible. The air smelled faintly of fuel and stale coffee, underscoring the long hours and growing strain. The room's low hum was punctuated by occasional bursts of data and the soft beep of incoming reports. A senior officer's voice cut through the noise, outlining the mission's dire status. The SEAL team had been stranded amid hostile waters, caught in the storm's wrath, with communications knocked out and GPS systems dead. Rescue options were closing fast. Emily's presence was quiet, but resolute. She stood apart, her hands folded calmly in front of her. The worn leather flight gloves clipped to her belt, catching the flicker of overhead lights. She was sidelined, her name absent from the official mission manifest. A ghost in the system, despite her skills. Around her, the murmurs of doubt swirled like the storm outside. Some questioned her judgment, others simply ignored her. Yet her eyes remained fixed on the digital map, where a small red dot blinked faintly, a lone distress beacon from the SEAL raft. That beacon was a fragile promise of survival amidst the chaos. The storm was more than weather. It was a symbol of the uncertainty gripping everyone. Flying blind was the reality now. The radar feeds were cluttered with interference. Instruments flickered and failed, and the once reliable technology offered little guidance. Emily knew that the only path forward was to trust her instincts and experience. The red beacon was a distant flame in the darkness, a guide to hope in an unforgiving sea. Her mind raced through flight patterns and hazard zones, recalling every hour logged in the cockpit, every procedure drilled until second nature. The storm's raw power was overwhelming, but it could not drown the steely resolve forged through years of training. She remembered the faces of those 6 men out there, the SEAL team, counting on a lifeline no one else dared to throw. Emily's breath was steady, her focus absolute. The officers' voices rose again as they discussed aborted attempts, fuel limitations, and the growing threat from hostile patrols nearby. There was no clear path to rescue, no approved plan. Yet Emily felt the weight of every second lost. The beacon pulsed steadily on the screen, the only proof that survival was still possible. Outside, the wind bent the flagpole on the hangar roof, the flag snapping sharply in the gusts. Emily's gaze lifted for a moment, meeting the storm's fury head-on. She adjusted the collar of her jacket, the fabric damp against her skin, and tightened the straps on her flight helmet, hanging at her side. The worn gloves at her belt were more than protection. They were a symbol of her readiness to face what others would not. In the corner of the command center, a junior officer's eyes flicked toward Emily, then quickly away. The room was a cage of hierarchy and doubt, but she remained steady, an island of quiet determination. The storm raged on outside, and the red beacon blinked with stubborn persistence. Flying blind was not just a metaphor, it was the unforgiving reality she would soon embrace. The crisis had settled like a weight in her chest, a reminder that this was more than a mission. It was a test of will against the relentless storm and the walls built by those who refused to see her worth. As the sky darkened and the first lightning cracked across the horizon, Captain Emily Carter took a breath and prepared herself. The night ahead would be unforgiving, but so was she. The lone pilot's struggle was just beginning. The winds outside had grown fiercer. Sheets of rain lashed the tarmac, driven sideways by gusts that bent the metal wings of parked aircraft and whipped loose equipment into frantic dance. Captain Emily Carter moved steadily through the hangar, her boots splashing through puddles. The worn leather gloves clipped to her belt, swinging slightly with each step. The storm was no longer a distant threat. It was pressing close, a living force challenging everything she had prepared for. Inside the briefing room, the mood was heavy with doubt. Officers gathered around the polished table, their faces etched with fatigue and skepticism. Conversations were quiet but charged beneath the clatter of rain on windows. Emily stood by the entrance, her posture calm and unyielding despite the undercurrent of dismissal. The mission was deemed too risky. Protocol forbade lone flights into the tempest, especially without full command clearance. Yet she had volunteered. Lieutenant Commander Harris, the operations officer, spoke with measured tone, his eyes fixed on the storm map projected on the wall. Captain Carter, the storm's intensity has tripled in the last hour. Without radar or GPS, your risk factors multiply exponentially. Command cannot authorize a solo rescue flight under these conditions. Emily met his gaze steadily. With all due respect, sir, the SEAL team's distress beacon is active. We have a window before the storm fully engulfs the area. Every moment we delay narrows their chance of survival. I'm prepared to navigate manually, relying on my instruments and experience. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the junior pilots shifted uneasily. The tone was polite but firm, a clear sign that her defiance was unwelcome. Yet Emily's determination was not born from rebellion. It was born from certainty. Years of training had honed her instinct sharper than any instrument. She knew this storm could be beaten, but only if someone had the courage to fly blind. She moved toward the MH-60R Seahawk, her fingers tracing the familiar contours of the aircraft's nose as the rain hammered the canopy. The machine was prepped meticulously, fuel tanks filled to maximum, emergency systems checked thrice, navigation charts laid out with manual coordinates marked in bold ink. Her flight gloves, scuffed but supple, lay folded beside the cockpit. The helmet cam was fitted carefully, its small lens a silent witness to the mission no one else wanted to sanction. Outside, the storm's fury escalated. The wind tore at the aircraft, gusts rattling the loose panels and sending a spray of water cascading down the fuselage. The sound was a roar, primal and relentless, drowning out all but the sharpest commands. Emily's breath came steady, despite the tension. This was a dance she had rehearsed countless times, but never in such perilous conditions. The radio crackled with intermittent chatter. Command reiterated the no-fly order, warnings echoing through static bursts. Emily responded only with calm affirmations, her voice steady and low. "I'm ready. The team's life depends on this." Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Jake Collins, slid into his seat with a nod, eyes reflecting the storm's chaos outside. They exchanged no unnecessary words. In moments like these, brevity was both comfort and command. Systems came alive with a chorus of beeps and whirs as the Seahawk powered up. Instrument panels lit the cockpit with soft green glows, each gauge and dial a critical lifeline. Emily's hands moved over controls with precision, running through pre-flight checks. The fuel gauge read full, the altimeter steady. The manual navigation charts were secured at her knee, their edges curling from use. She touched the inked waypoints lightly, grounding herself in the task ahead. Flying blind was more than a motif. It was the harsh reality she faced. The storm battered the airfield as they taxied toward the runway. Gusts threatened to sway the aircraft, forcing Emily to counterbalance with subtle adjustments. Raindrops struck the canopy like gunfire, blurring the world beyond into a shifting smear of gray and white. Visibility was negligible, but inside, Emily's focus was razor sharp. The windscreen wipers fought a losing battle, clearing only momentary slivers of view. She relied on instruments, muscle memory, and the quiet confidence born of countless flights through lesser storms. The helmet cam's lens caught every flicker of lightning that split the sky, a silent recorder of a flight few believed could succeed. As they reached the runway threshold, Emily's heart beat in rhythm with the rising roar of the engines. She glanced briefly at her co-pilot, whose steady gaze offered quiet reassurance. The final clearance was a formality. There was no support waiting beyond the storm's edge. They were alone. With a slow, deliberate push of the throttle, the Seahawk surged forward. Wheels kissed the wet runway, then lifted as the storm enveloped them fully. The wind howled, the rain screamed, and the aircraft danced on the edge of control. Emily's hands never wavered. Her eyes stayed fixed on the shifting glow of instrument panels, the red beacon's faint pulse guiding her through the tempest. Inside the cockpit, time stretched and compressed. The storm outside was chaos incarnate, but here, there was order rhythm born of discipline and unshakable will. The flying blind motif was no longer symbolic. It was her truth. The manual charts, the worn gloves, and the helmet cam were her anchors in this storm of uncertainty. As the Seahawk disappeared into the curtain of rain and lightning, Emily's resolve burned brighter than any beacon. She was the angel in the storm, the quiet force defying the odds, carrying hope on her wings into the heart of chaos. The storm was a living, breathing beast that wrapped itself tightly around the MH-60R Seahawk as Captain Emily Carter pushed the aircraft deeper into its raging heart. Rain hammered relentlessly against the canopy, each droplet a sharp percussion that obscured the view outside. The wind screamed in her ears, bending the helicopter with violent gusts that tossed her and her co-pilot like a fragile leaf caught in a tempest. Visibility had dropped to near zero. The world outside reduced to a swirling blur of gray and white, punctuated only by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the chaos for a split second. Within the cockpit, the glow of flickering instrument panels was the sole constant in an otherwise unpredictable sea of noise and motion. Emily's hands moved deliberately, adjusting the cyclic and collective controls with precise, practiced motions. Each input was measured, gentle yet decisive, countering the erratic forces that threatened to overwhelm the aircraft. Her breathing was steady despite the storm's fury, a slow rhythm that steadied her nerves and sharpened her focus. The absence of GPS and radio communication meant she was navigating blind, relying entirely on her instruments, her fading memory of the region, and the soft, intermittent pulse of the SEAL team's red distress beacon. That blinking light was her lifeline, a distant, wavering hope that flickered through the deluge. Alarms occasionally blared in the cockpit, warning of system irregularities brought on by the storm's interference. Flickering displays and glitching sensors tested Emily's resolve as much as the weather itself. She responded with calm determination, toggling switches, recalibrating altimeters, and cross-checking the manual navigation charts clipped to her kneeboard. Flying blind was more than a technical challenge. It was a trial of will, an exercise in trusting her instincts over failing technology. Every decision mattered, and there was no margin for error. Through a brief clearing in the tempest, Emily caught a glimpse of a shadow moving through the churning waters below an enemy patrol boat scanning the surface for any sign of the stranded SEAL team or the daring rescue helicopter. Her pulse quickened. The danger was no longer abstract. She angled the Seahawk away from the vessel, her movements smooth but urgent, mindful of the limited space and turbulent winds. The storm was her cover, but it also made every maneuver treacherous. Her co-pilot's voice crackled faintly through static, the only words barely audible. Red beacons ahead. Hold steady. Emily nodded without turning, her eyes scanning the instrument panel as the beacon's pulse grew slightly stronger. It was a fragile guide, flickering like a candle in the wind. But it was all she had. The helicopter dipped and rolled as she battled a sudden gust, her knuckles whitening on the controls. She bit back the instinct to tense further, drawing strength from the steady rhythm of her breath and the faint glow of the beacon. Memories flickered through her mind, hours spent training for moments like this. The countless simulations where she learned to trust herself when every tool failed. Fear was present, a shadow lurking at the edge of her consciousness, but it was drowned out by a fierce resolve. She was the angel in this storm, the solitary figure threading through chaos to bring salvation. The metaphor was not lost on her, even in the moment's intensity. The cockpit instruments blinked erratically again, some readings lagging, others fluctuating wildly. Emily's fingers danced over switches, engaging backup systems, recalibrating sensors. She was flying on faith as much as skill. Every passing second drew her closer to the SEAL team, and further from any hope of external rescue or support. Outside, the storm seemed to pulse and breathe around her. Thunder rolled like distant artillery, and lightning forked dangerously close, illuminating the sea's heaving waves. Emily kept the Seahawk steady, guided by the soft red pulse of the beacon and her unyielding instinct. The water below was a violent expanse of dark, frothing whitecaps, swallowing light and sound alike. The team's raft, no larger than a speck, bobbed precariously, a fragile island amid the tempest. The red beacon pulsed once more, its light breaking through a break in the rain just long enough for Emily to fixate on it. She adjusted her approach, mindful of rotor wash that could capsize the raft or send her off course. Her heart pounded, not just from the physical strain, but the immense responsibility pressing on her shoulders. Every detail was magnified: the whine of the engines, the splash of rain against the glass, the shudder of the aircraft as it fought the winds. The silence between radio bursts was heavy with tension, filled only by the mechanical hum and her steady commands. She reminded herself that every moment was precious. Hesitation could mean disaster. The storm showed no mercy. Gusts lashed harder, and visibility shrank to a thin veil. Yet Emily held course, eyes fixed on the instruments, fingers steady on the controls. The beacon's pulse flickered irregularly now, a heartbeat weakening against the storm's assault. Flying blind was no longer metaphor. It was the crucible of her skill, nerve, and faith in herself. As the Seahawk drew within range, Emily's focus sharpened to a razor's edge. The faint red light was her only certainty in the void, a symbol of hope and survival. The instruments flickered one last time, then stabilized. She was home in the storm's eye, poised between danger and salvation. This flight was a testament to everything: she was silent strength, unyielding determination, and the courage to fly where others dared not follow. The angel in the storm was not a myth. She was here, battling the tempest alone, guided by a fragile beacon and an unbreakable will. The Seahawk hovered over the roiling sea, its rotors thrashing against the wind as Captain Emily Carter steadied the aircraft above the tiny, battered raft. Below, waves crashed and tumbled like wild beasts, threatening to engulf the fragile vessel with each towering swell. The storm had not relented. Rain sliced through the air, and darkness pressed close, broken only by the faint, flickering red beacon pulsing from the SEAL team's raft. That blinking light was a stubborn signal in the vast chaos, a beacon of hope that guided Emily through the tempest. Her fingers tightened on the cyclic controls, her gaze flicking between the instrument panel and the fragile outline below. The roar of the rotors blended with the relentless crash of the ocean, a cacophony she had learned to tune out, focusing instead on the fine balance required to keep the Seahawk steady. Hovering in such violent weather was a technical challenge few dared attempt, but the lives beneath her demanded nothing less. The winch cable dangled below, swinging like a pendulum buffeted by the storm's fury. Emily's heart quickened as she guided the harness down toward the raft, watching for the slightest movement that might throw the delicate rescue operation into chaos. The downwash from the rotors whipped the sea into froth, and the spray stung her cheeks through the open cockpit vents. The raft's occupants, soaked and tense, waited in grim silence, trusting her steady hand in a moment that felt suspended between life and death. "Captain Carter." "Harness is clear," came the low, clipped voice of the SEAL team leader over the helmet radio, his tone tight with controlled urgency. Emily nodded, though she knew he couldn't see her, and began lowering the winch slowly. The cable hissed against the sea's surface as it approached the raft, and one of the SEALs reached up to grab the harness, their wet hands barely visible in the storm's dim light. A sudden gust caught the helicopter, forcing Emily's hand to adjust sharply. The cable jerked violently, the winch struggling to hold steady against the twisting force. For a heart-stopping moment, the cable snagged on a piece of equipment protruding from the raft, threatening to snap or drag the rescue into disaster. Emily's eyes narrowed, her hands moving with calm precision as she eased the controls, steadying the Seahawk and reeling the cable taut without jerking it free abruptly. Minutes stretched as she balanced the aircraft, the swirling wind pressing against her with unrelenting force. Winch cable snagged, holding steady. She reported softly into the comms, her voice steady despite the adrenaline racing beneath her skin. The team leader's voice crackled back, reassuring but tense. "We're good. Ready on your signal." Emily gave a small, controlled nod. Lifting now. The cable tightened as the first SEAL hooked into the harness. Slowly. He was raised above the storm-tossed raft, his wet form silhouetted against the lightning-lit sky. The rotor wash buffeted him fiercely, and Emily fought to keep the helicopter stable as he ascended, disappearing briefly into the darkness before safely reaching the cabin door. The door swung open to receive him, and the crew's brief exchange of nods was lost beneath the storm's roar. The process repeated, each extraction a delicate dance between man, machine, and nature. 6 lives depended on Emily's steady hand, her calm determination threading through the chaos. She timed each lift with care, mindful of fuel and the ever-worsening weather. Every cable deployment was a test of skill, every ascent a victory against overwhelming odds. Through it all, the red beacon below flickered persistently, a symbol of survival amid destruction. It pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding despite the storm's rage. Emily's helmet cam recorded every second, a silent witness to the heroism unfolding far from the cheers and lights of safer skies. The storm showed no mercy. Rain obscured vision. Lightning flashed dangerously close, and the sea heaved unpredictably beneath them. But Emily's resolve never wavered. Her eyes scanned the instruments constantly, monitoring altitude, fuel, and the delicate balance of forces threatening to tear the helicopter apart. The rescue was more than a mission. It was a testament to human will in the face of nature's fury. At one point, a sudden wind shear caught the Seahawk unexpectedly, pitching it sharply to one side. Emily's gloved hands gripped the controls with renewed intensity, countering the shift and stabilizing the aircraft just as the winch cable reached for the next SEAL. The moment was a razor's edge, the difference between success and disaster measured in fractions of a second. The last SEAL was pulled from the raft, exhausted but alive, his face briefly visible through the visor as he was secured inside. Emily felt a surge of relief tempered by exhaustion. The 6 lives she had retrieved were a victory against impossible odds. Yet there was no applause. No fanfare, only the ongoing storm and the steady hum of machinery. As the Seahawk lifted away from the now empty raft, Emily stole a glance downward. The red beacon's light faded into the darkness, but its symbolism endured. It was hope, survival, and the quiet promise that even in the fiercest storm, salvation could arrive. The rescue had been a delicate balance of precision and courage, a silent act of heroism witnessed only by the storm, the sea, and the glowing eye of the camera recording every moment. Emily Carter remained calm and focused, the angel in the storm guiding her charges to safety amid chaos and danger. The return flight was a battle against dwindling fuel and fading strength. Captain Emily Carter gripped the controls of the MH-60R Seahawk as it sliced through the remnants of the storm, the heavy weight of 6 rescued SEALs pressing down on the aircraft's performance. outside. The sky was a bruised swirl of gray, the tempest broken, but still snarling with fierce gusts that rattled the cockpit and tested every ounce of her skill. The fuel gauge flickered erratically near empty, a constant reminder of the razor-thin margin between success and failure. Emily adjusted the throttle with care, balancing power and conservation, every twitch of the controls critical in this final stretch. The helicopter's hum was a steady pulse beneath her, the fragile lifeline that carried them through the dark and uncertain skies back to the carrier waiting on the horizon. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was taut with exhaustion and relief. The SEALs, soaked and silent, sat strapped into their seats, their faces etched with fatigue and unspoken gratitude. Emily stole a glance at each one, their survival, the quiet victory that had driven her through the storm. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, heavier than the aircraft's load, a burden carried with solemn pride. The radar showed the carrier's faint silhouette ahead, a beacon of safety in the gloom. Yet there was no fanfare waiting for her on deck. The landing was a muted affair, the crew's movements efficient but subdued, the air thick with the residue of the mission's harsh demands. Ground personnel watched with tired eyes, their expressions unreadable. Command officers stood back, nodding curtly without words of praise or recognition. Emily guided the Seahawk down with steady hands, the rotors slicing through the mist as she executed a precise touchdown on the slick deck. The engines wound down, and the cabin filled with the soft hiss of depressurization. She removed her helmet slowly, her face damp with rain and sweat, eyes reflecting the weight of what had been endured. The worn flight gloves came off next, folded carefully and laid beside her seat, silent emblems of the mission's toll. She stepped out onto the deck, the storm's fury now a fading memory, replaced by a chilling quiet that seemed to press in from all sides. The sea stretched out, dark and endless, and the carrier's lights shimmered through the haze, a fragile promise of normalcy. Yet Emily felt the distance between her and those lights a gulf carved by doubt and disregard. Inside her mind, memories flickered hours spent fighting against nature and protocol, the lonely cockpit where instinct had been the only guide. The quiet heroism that had saved lives remained unseen by most, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and skepticism. She had flown blind into the storm and emerged carrying hope. Yet the silence that greeted her was a stark reminder of the cost. The helicopter was secured and refueled quickly, preparations for the next mission already underway. Emily stood apart, watching the flurry of activity with detached focus. Her thoughts drifted to the 6 men whose lives she had pulled from the jaws of death. They would be honored, their bravery recognized, their sacrifices recorded. But her own name would remain a whisper, a shadow in the annals of that day. She cleaned her flight gloves methodically, the worn leather still damp in her hands. Folding them carefully, she placed them in her flight bag, a quiet ritual that spoke of readiness and resilience. The storm had passed, but its imprint lingered, etched into her very being. As the dawn began to break over the horizon, casting pale light across the deck, Emily allowed herself a moment of stillness. The sky was calm now, the tempest spent, yet within her, the storm's echo remained. She was the angel in the storm unseen, uncelebrated, but unwavering. Her fight was far from over, but for this night, she had triumphed. The return was not just a flight, but a testament to quiet strength, to the courage that persists without applause. Emily Carter carried that truth with her as she prepared for whatever lay ahead, the silent hero who had braved the storm and lived to fight another day. The storm had passed. Outside the window, the early morning sky was a soft gray wash, calm and still after the fury of the night. Captain Emily Carter sat alone in a dimly lit room, the glow of a small monitor casting flickering shadows across her face. The helmet cam footage played quietly. A silent witness to the rescue, she had flown the flight into darkness and chaos to bring 6 men home. Each frame was a memory frozen in time, rain slicing the canopy, the faint red pulse of the beacon cutting through the storm, the delicate dance of the winch cable swinging in the wind. Her eyes tracked the images with a measured calm, revisiting moments of tension and resolve. The steady pulse of the beacon on the screen was more than a signal. It was a symbol of hope against impossible odds, though the world outside had returned to quiet. Inside this room. The fight lived on, etched in pixels in memory. Emily's hands rested lightly on the table, near the worn flight gloves she had carefully cleaned and folded earlier. They were an emblem of the mission's cost and continuity, reminders that every challenge was met with steady hands and unwavering resolve. In the silence, distant voices drifted through the walls, quiet conversations in hushed tones among the SEAL team and aircrew. The rescue had become more than a mission. It was a whispered legend, a story told quietly among those who understood the weight of courage in the face of neglect. The name Storm Angel had begun to spread, an unspoken tribute to the lone pilot who flew blind into the tempest and returned with life. Emily did not seek accolades. She did not wait for commendations or official recognition. Her defiance was quiet, rooted in a professionalism that carried her forward without fanfare. She moved methodically through her gear, packing and preparing as if the next call could come at any moment. Her expression was composed, focused, a calm readiness honed by countless hours in the cockpit and the solitude of unseen battles. The room seemed to breathe with the memory of the storm, but also with a sense of renewal. The calm sky outside was a promise, a reminder that even after the darkest night, light could return. The red beacon on the footage, steadfast against the chaos, was a lasting symbol of that hope. It flickered still, a heartbeat in the storm's aftermath, an enduring presence guiding those who followed. Emily rose slowly, folding the helmet cam's cord with care, storing it away alongside her gloves. She glanced once more out the window, the horizon soft and open. The mission had ended, but the legacy was ongoing. Silent heroes shaped history not with noise, but with quiet acts of bravery that lingered long after the storm had passed. She stepped toward the door, ready for whatever came next. The angel in the storm moved forward, not for glory, but because it was her duty, her calling. And in that quiet defiance lay the true measure of heroism.